Build your dream home with confidence. The BuildMasters podcast delivers expert interviews and real answers to simplify your toughest decisions. Each episode equips you with insider knowledge and actionable tips. Subscribe today to learn the art of building from the true masters with BuildMasters.
So last year, my family and I had the most awesome opportunity to build our own house. We were the GCs on this build. We had so many questions though along the way. I mean, from contracts, planning, foundations, all the way to final inspection, dealing with subs. I realized at that moment that my dad was my lifeline. He has over 40 years of industry knowledge, and I am super excited because we sat down with him, interviewed him for over 2 hours to really understand the finer points of building, what to look for, tips and tricks, expert advice along the way. I also realized at that point that not everybody has a father like mine that they can just call. So we compiled all of that into the BuildMasters podcast. This podcast gives you expert interviews, extremely good knowledge so that you can feel confident about building your own house or working with a GC or other subs to make it happen for you. So stay tuned. We got a lot of great content coming and we are super excited to share it with you. Okay, so we've talked a little bit about plumbing and electrical. Let's go to sheetrock real quick. So, insulation. So my house,
wait a minute. Before you do anything like that, a lot of times what you have to do before you even get to sheetrock, you have to have your windows and your exterior waterproofing on, whether it be zip board or Tyvek. I mean, your zip board, which is your green board with the seams taped up, or your Tyvek sheeting on the outside with your windows in. And you have to get your plywood, if it's shear, the sheathing inspected before you put the Tyvek on.
Okay, so there's a couple things here. So when I did mine, number one, we put up all of the sheathing, which was we did zip, and we taped the frame, taped the seams. And I asked the framers, hey guys, are we allowed to tape the seams or do they have to do the inspection? And they said, oh no, they just pound on it and then they can let you know anyway. So they actually required us to remove all of the tape. So that was $3,000 worth of tape. And then they had to put it all back on once the inspection happened, which I can understand what they're saying. Like if half the house was done correctly and half of it wasn't, then you're gonna have your
any plywood, exterior plywood, which nowadays is they pretty much plywood the entire outside of a house anymore, just because it's easier. You don't have the shear problems, and you have more places to.
But you will find that in certain areas, like in Arizona, you'll find that houses don't have, because I know some people kind of get worried about that, especially if it's more tract homes. But they'll be looking at it and they're like, oh my gosh, there's nothing on these walls. Technically, you don't need it because the engineering plan would show there's only this much you need to put on the outside for shearing to make sure. And shear is specifically the wind flex of the wind on the framing, right?
Right. So there's shear panels that have to be nailed off correctly. Most custom houses, they put plywood on the whole thing.
Yeah.
On tract houses, they want to keep the expense down, so they'll just put the shear panels on, but those have to be inspected before you cover them up.
Yeah.
And so what you end up doing is you got to end up getting it watertight before you can. Then once you have it watertight, your rough electrical's done, your rough plumbing's done, your rough HVAC is done. Then you can get an inspection for the inside, and you have to inspect it before you insulate it.
And that's inspection for plumbing, and they usually pressurize the plumbing.
It's either water, where they'll fill the whole thing up with water with a 10-foot stack for that's the amount of pressure they have to have to make sure there's no leaks. And that has to be the, refilled. I mean, actually you do it for the waste in the ground, and then you refill it for your top out to make sure there's nothing
so if anybody
leaking.
Pokes a hole.
And so you can either be air or it can be water. And so you get that test done. Electrical, they go through and just make sure everything's per code. And that's up to the electrician to make sure he's per code. Not much you can really look at there. That's more him knowing what he's doing, because most inspectors will catch anything that's wrong.
One thing I found to be interesting is when we did our radiant floor heat, there was no inspection necessary.
They don't know. They don't know how to inspect it.
Yeah, which I thought was actually crazy because like if something was wrong with it, you could potentially cause a big problem.
Well, if it's wrong, you're screwed anyway. So.
Yeah.
It's not like the drywall falling. You just don't have any heat in your floor. But that's where it's important on the in-floor heating, which we don't do much down here at all. So that's all a mountain thing. But what were we talking about? We're talking about once everything's inspected, you get your rough plumbing, rough electrical, rough AC. HVAC, then you can insulate. And you always, always, always have to do your drywall first. And then if you're putting stucco, then you stucco. Your drywall has to be nailed, banged, beat up, put on first. You don't have to have it taped and finished yet, but it has to be up before you start your stucco, because you don't want
You're
people
talking about exterior stucco?
exterior stucco.
Oh.
So you don't want people banging on walls with the new stucco on the outside, because then you chip off all your
stuff falls off.
all your new stucco.
Okay.
So once you're done banging,
Does that also apply to like brick veneers, things like that, or no?
No. No, I mean a brick veneer. I mean, stucco is a whole different, because you're stud on stud. The brick veneer, there's usually a floating spot in between or something like that. But anytime you have a cementatious material that's applied up against another one, if you bang on this side, you're going to push this off the wall.
Good to know.
And so then that messes up the adhesion to the chicken wire or whatever.
Well, now think about insulation really quickly. So we did something crazy, which was it was actual wool, sheep's wool insulation. I did that because it's a higher R value. I could do it myself. It was just a little bit more expensive than like pink regular R21 insulation on the walls, but the wool itself could get wet. So in the event that you do have a leak or something like that,
or rain,
you don't have to replace the insulation. You literally just let it dry out. Like pull off the drywall, for example, let it dry out, and it's fine. So that was a big selling point for me. A lot of labor, but me and the family did that. But I think what was interesting is we did staggered stud, because staggered stud allows you to not have the inside touch the outside. There's other ways to do that, though. You could do zip panels that have a little bit of foam right in between. So that would.
You're talking about a lot more expense.
Yes, yeah, for sure. So when we did ours, and I'm glad I took your advice. So there's two reasons I'm glad, and I wish I would have done a little differently. We did 24 inches on center outside and 16 inches on center inside, which is great for hanging and stuff. And I know like there's going to be something every 16 inches. I wish I would have just done, it made the framing actually quite difficult for the guys when they got, because it was off, right? So every once in a while you get really close, some studs really close to each other.
24 and 24.
I wish I would have done 24, 24 or 16, 16, whatever. It didn't matter. Obviously a lot more lumber with 16, 16, but then that way I think it would have made their lives a little easier overall. But anyway, so I know a lot of people are doing closed cell foam, which
There's
is
starting to be some questions
expensive
about that, though.
Yes, off gassing, and then it leaks, so you can't see the leaks.
They're starting to question whether you should use rigid foam or not. Kind of a different thing that I did on the townhouse that we built for ourselves way back when, 42 years ago, is I had a 6-inch wall, and I sprayed on 2 inches or 1.5 inches to 2 inches of foam first, just to make a good sealer. And then I put bad insulation on top of that.
So did you know you were way ahead of your time?
I didn't know that 42 years ago.
Because I actually talked to a building advisor out of Seattle who does a lot of passive homes. And he said the same thing. He's like, the very best thing you could possibly do, especially because it saves money but also gives you the same benefit, is a flash and bat. Flash 2 inches roughly of closed cell foam. Bat with, you could do rock wool if you really want to get crazy, but you could bat, and then it does a great, because it seals it. It provides a really great insulation barrier, and then you have your regular.
Well, that house down there that townhouse is amazing in terms of the air conditioning bills. I mean, it's rented now, but it was fantastic for air conditioning bills. I mean, it was almost too tight, which was sometimes a problem. But other than that, I mean, once you get the drywall up, everything goes pretty fast from there on out.
What's the difference in cost between a level? Because some people talk, I want a level 5, right, on my drywall, right? Which is extremely expensive compared to, say, a level 4 or 3. What's the difference? I know it's obviously coatings and how much they're taping the seams and all of that. So
well, level 5 is smooth
finishing, and
the problem with smooth is it's really hard to touch up later. I mean, if you have to patch something, it's hard to do. You have to hire somebody in to do it, because you wouldn't be able to do a level 5 to repair if you had to.
So if you had to do a repair on, say, like a door, somebody went through it with the doorknob. If that was the case, how big of a spot do you have to fix to make it actually feather out?
On a level 5, you probably have to do a 3-foot diameter area for it to actually work.
And I know it's weird to some people that are not from the Southwest for textured drywall, right? So like knockdown or whatever. They have no idea what that concept is, and they think it's cool or weird.
What's kind of in between is what's a 90-10. So what it is, you have 90% is relatively smooth, and then you have 10%, and they have a little, gap,
a few
little skip
imperfections. Yeah, that's what mine is.
Yeah,
so that is a 90-10, right?
Yeah, so that way you're not having doesn't have to be perfect if you patch it, because you're going to have a little bit of a skip. But a 90-10 is more expensive than knockdown. Knockdown, you spray it on, they knock it down, and it looks
You're
like
good to go.
little quarters and dimes and nickels all over your wall, basically. You're good to go. That's basically the tract home type thing, and or orange peel, where it looks like an orange peel. And then you go 90-10 is before you get to a level 5, which is smooth as a baby's butt.
So on mine, I had a great contractor, by the way, but he was an older gentleman, and that's why I feel like he was good. He actually took a lot of pride in his work. But he did have pinholes. There's like little tiny pinholes. Now, granted, on my light colored paint, you couldn't really see them. Although you can when you look at it in the right sheen. On my dark colored paint, you could totally see a lot more of the pinholes, right? So how are pinholes common or not common?
The pinholes come about with how much moisture is in there.
They're mud.
With the pinholes, it's air drying.
Little air bubbles.
And so if it's a little bit denser, thicker mud, you won't have those pinholes.
So
it's harder to use, but it's not.
So should I have had them, if I noticed the pinholes, obviously before you paint, right? Should I have had them redo that, or is that something that's like, hey, you got to live with it?
That's totally up to what you can. I mean, they'd redo the whole house. Or it depends on who you are. You know, a lot of people can't see it. You know, it doesn't really bother them. It just depends on how they applied the mud, how the moisture in the air when they did it. You know, if it was dry, if it was moist. You know, because the moisture in the air, you take that into the mud when it's drying. So there's all kinds of different things. They just
he said to not fill the pinholes after paint, because then you could potentially cause them again, just because
it does.
You have a coating on one side, so it doesn't do it properly.
It doesn't dry right.
Gotcha.
So if you see them, you got to do it before you paint. If you don't see them, it's almost impossible to take care of it.
Gotcha. Okay, so then from a drywall perspective, I know bullnose is typically a little bit less common now because people like the 90-degree.
Yeah, it's just weird.
And then it goes back and forth, right?
Elevate your home with Glass House. Don't settle for ordinary. Our stunning bifold and multi-slide glass doors transform any setting into a luxurious retreat. Take advantage of 50% off retail prices for unmatched value. Try our exclusive online pricing calculator for an instant estimate in seconds. Quick, easy, with no strings attached. Step into sophistication without compromise. Choose Glass House for an unparalleled customer experience at a fraction of the price.
But from a drywall perspective, how long should it take to hang a house? And two different crews usually, right? And the guys that hang are really amazing to watch. Same thing with the tapers and all of that. But you have a separate tape crew and a separate finish crew, or are they kind of the same?
Well, it's usually two different ones. I mean, depending on the company that does it. But because a lot of times you'll have piece workers that'll hang it. You'll have a drywaller that has his own taping crew, because that's the one they have to make sure that's who does the best job and your finish work. The hanging crew, they usually will piece it out. Like this 2,700 square foot house here, they hung in a day and a half, and it had a lot of drywall.
How many crews?
5 guys.
And that was 1/2 inch in the house, 5/8 in the garages?
5/8, yeah. 5/8 in the garages and stuff like that. And then, I mean, they hung it out so fast, it was unbelievable.
And that's all fire code reasons, right? 5/8 in the garage?
Yeah.
And then 1/2 inch of it.
Yeah, any place that you've got to contain a fire, it has to be 5/8. You know, bathrooms have to be green board, that kind of thing. They don't want green board on the ceiling, which is weird. I don't quite understand. They want a type C on the ceiling, I think they call it. And because it's anti-sag. All ceilings have to be anti-sag now. Especially if there's 24 inches on center, they need the anti-sag drywall up there. But the taper's the one that make it look pretty, and they'll catch the problems and fix them as they go. But usually the drywall will have his own taping crew. He'll piece out the hanging.
Gotcha.
And the hangers have to do a good job, otherwise he's mad at them.
Because it takes the tapers
and then he won't use them again. You know, we got to make sure their screws or their nails are set, so they're not banging those in as they're trying to tape, and they get their blades caught on that and get little dings in their blades, and then
I noticed
tapers get mad.
With our guys who hung it, one of the guys, he was a little bit older gentleman. He liked to throw nails in every once in a while, or throw them nail at the bottom because he didn't like to bend down and screw it. some of those nails have popped, right? Because it's a nail, not a screw. There's been some changes or something's happened or somebody pushed up against it or whatever and it popped the nail.
It's usually the only pop is if they didn't get the drywall back against the stud when they did it. So that has to do with if they didn't hold the drywall up off the floor and it hit on the floor and then they pushed it back. A lot of times they didn't push it back far enough.
So there's space between them.
So there's a little space, and so then it pops. But if it's nailed right, it's not going to pop.
Interesting.
It's not whether screws or pops. It doesn't matter.
Well,
screws or nails.
So here's the difference for me between what I thought was a great contractor and somebody who was just honestly not very good. So my drywall contractor, number one, he was very communicative. Hey, I'm going to be out of town these days. The crew will show up on these days. You will have a week gap between here and here. This is when the guys are going to come tape, right? He told us everything about what was going on versus my electrical guy was like not showing up. I had no idea where he was. He'd go on vacation. You couldn't get a hold of him because he was camping or whatever, which is fine. He can go camping, but like, let me know. And then number two, the drywall guy, he came back to fix anything that we wanted fixed. It wasn't a lot, but you know, there's some butt joints that I didn't like, and it was right in the walkway. And said, yeah, sure, we can fix that for you. And then even so much so where we decided to not put stone. We couldn't put stone on the outside fireplace because we ran out of stone, and it was a set of stone we couldn't get any more of. So I had asked him to come back, and he didn't actually even charge me. He just, we'll throw it up on that for you, and we'll texture it, no problem. I thought for sure he was going to charge me, and I offered, but he said, no worries. And so he was somebody who I feel like knew their craft, knew how to be a business owner, and they got referred out. In fact,
they got referrals.
Well, I forgot to actually get the drywall screws inspected. I don't know if I told you this.
Yeah, you did. But because he did it.
But because he did it.
Yeah,
the city said, well, you know, we've done a lot of his jobs, lots of them over the years, so we're going to go ahead and improve it because he does a good job. So.
Something about screws too is when you're in the bathroom, say like in the shower, and you're putting green board up or you're putting hardy board or whatever, there's a special screw you have to use in those areas so they don't rust. Because even if you have tile and you get some moisture behind it and they rust, then that shows behind marble and stuff like that.
Brandon had, my brother had.
Yeah, so and we did that house. But I think what it was, I think the plumber took a section out.
Oh, and then redid it.
And then put it back in and used the wrong screw. Because otherwise it would have been all over. It was just in one area. But there's a special screw you have to use anywhere you have wet. I mean, wet, not just around a sink, but where it's going to be wet on the walls. You want to make sure that there's a special screw used for that. And there's all kinds of things.
Here's a question that comes up all the time I've noticed. From the time your drywall is done, textured, not necessarily painted, right? All the texture is done, tape, all that. What is the percentage complete on a house? Is that 50%? Is that 30? Is that 75% done?
Well, you probably have a roof on by then.
Gotcha.
Your roof's probably, because a lot of times you have to get the weight of the roof up there before you drywall.
And before you put your windows in, right? You typically want to have that.
Usually when you get the weight up there so everything's pushing down and compressing. So if nothing else, it's stocked. It may not be laid out, but doing a roof on a house is a 2-day thing, usually for a good sized crew. But once you get the drywall up, you're probably 70%, 75% done.
Okay.
Because then all your finishes.
Yeah.
And you're setting your air conditioners and your compressors and that kind of stuff, condensers. And so you still have a lot of trim and cabinets have to go in. And I mean, nowadays cabinets are just unbelievably expensive compared to the old days. I mean, usually you didn't worry that much about cabinets. Now you got to take a loan out.
Literally, it's one of the biggest expenses when you're done with all of your framing and
everybody wants granite or quartz and tops. And so that's, I mean, pretty big expenses there. But that's why I say, I think because you're 70%, it's not like 80 or 90% because you still have a lot of finishes to do. Flooring, you know, if you're going to put tile, wood, whatever down on the flooring. So there's, and then all your trim light fixtures, all your trim plumbing, all your trim, you know, putting all your vents on, all your.
So is that like for example, for the plumber to come back and finish up, right? Put all of the fixtures in and all of that. Is that like a 3-day job on a 3,000 square foot house?
No, because the tubs are usually in, the shower bases are usually in.
So it should be like a 1 to 2 day thing?
It should be, if everything's there, it should be a 2-day thing.
Countertops are all in, obviously.
For a smaller house. Okay. Yeah.
And then for the electrician to come back, put all the switches in, outlets, all that kind of stuff, fans.
2 to 3.
2 to 3. And then obviously it depends on if you've gone overboard like we did.
Right.
Or if you have some complicated chandeliers or something.
A 2-man crew in a normal sized house should be able to trim it out in 2 days.
Gotcha. Okay.
2 to 3, depending on how complicated and how much the size of the panel and all that kind of thing.
And then when and who is responsible, say, for final grade outside? Like everybody's done, all the stuff's being done inside. Somebody needs to pull
Usually
final grade
it's you.
off of things.
You're responsible, and usually the concrete guy will backfill against the stem, so they have a level place to work when they're pouring the slab. So once the stem's in, they should, which your guy didn't, which is I was amazed.
Yeah, it was very lumpy.
They will usually go around the outside and use a grade tractor and push up against the stem and kind of grade it so their guys, while they're
easier to work,
using their floats and everything, it's easier to work around them. So they'll do a rough grade, but then once you're done, it's up to you and a landscaper to do all the finished work around there.
Okay.
Unless the general contractor has it in their bid, but they don't usually you want to do that on your own anyway.
Now I know subcontractors are notorious for not cleaning up after themselves.
But
I know you said on your jobs it was always in the contract, right?
On my jobs, if you didn't sweep every day, you at least piled everything in a corner, and then what it was is like every 2 to 3 days it was a pick up and haul out type thing. Never on a weekend was it not swept. I mean, you sweep.
And is that for your clients to come?
That's for me to be anal.
Okay.
But on the
but it's a good job. I mean,
but on the commercial jobs, it was for the clients. If they wanted to visit on the weekend, I wanted that place clean.
Yeah.
There was never any safety issues even during the week. If they're done in a room, they pile all their cutoffs or whatever. With us, it was metal studs too. Everything would get piled in a corner so somebody could walk in there without tripping.
So there's safety issues, obviously, with not being clean. Also, just time it takes to do stuff or causing people to trip, like with carrying stuff, and then you damage the material.
Well, it's easier to do a little bit at a time rather than a whole bunch at once. So do a little bit at a time. And what's really good on the commercial jobs that I had, my subs knew it. I mean, I didn't have to preach it. They knew. End of the day, push the stuff to the corner, halfway clean up. For Fridays, nobody left the job until that place was spick and span. And the electricians would pick up behind the framers. And
so you could put that in your contract very simply.
Sure.
Either with your GC or with your subs if you're doing it yourself.
Your GC is the main guy.
Yeah.
You want a clean job.
And then you say, look, this has to be done. And if I keep finding it not being done, then what? You say, like, I'm just withholding payment until it's clean.
Well, just say if I have to go in there and clean it up,
I'll charge you.
I'll charge you.
Or if I have to hire somebody to go do it because I don't have time.
Right.
Gotcha.
It has to be a clean job is a safe job. That's the biggest thing. Because if you got stuff you're tripping over, people can get hurt.
And it takes less time.
Yep.
Too, because you're not having to move things out of the way. And
a lot less time.
Yeah, for ladders and who knows what else. Especially we use the roller scaffolding, right? So the ground's clean. You can roll around and do stuff and put things up.
And drywallers will usually scrap out that same day because they're working, like say, they're on stilts and everything else, so they don't want to trip over all that kind of crap.
Now you talked about on our job, it was weird because even though my drywall guys were awesome, they didn't scrape the floors. Well, they did a little bit, but not very much.
I've never seen that.
And they didn't clean. And he actually said in all of his time, he's never cleaned a garage out. Like how
I've
our
never
garages.
heard of that.
Yeah, so
I mean, usually they'll come in and they'll at least hose it out or power wash it out.
Yeah.
If they don't want to put.
He said, if you want me to, I'll do it. And I said, oh no worries. I've got kiddos. I guess we'll do it. But
I don't think I've ever seen a drywall company not clean up the concrete.
Interesting.
I mean, inside, they don't have to hose it down or something, but they at least scrape it. On the outside, patios or they're hanging drywall above on a patio or in a garage, I don't think I've ever seen them not scrape it and hose it down.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Thanks for tuning in. Hit subscribe to make sure you never miss an episode. Be sure to explore Glass House's exclusive online pricing calculator for instant estimates on gorgeous bifold and multi-slide glass doors. Find the link in the description or visit glasshaus.co. That's glass-haus.co. Until next time.